Welcome to A Cup of Gratitude with Amanda Schaefer. Hi, I'm your host, and I'm so glad you stopped by. This podcast is really for anyone, anywhere, anytime. And it's about taking a moment to slow down and look around and actually see all of the good things that are there. There's no question that asks, is your cup half empty or half full? But I think a better question is, what's in your cup? I mean, a drop of gratitude will benefit your life unimaginably more than a full cup of anything else. So let's settle in and take a look at how we can shift our focus and embrace the joy and the wonder of the life that we have. And once you start, you won't be able to stop seeing the good. And just like me, you won't be able to stop talking about it. And somehow that creates even more. Even in the midst of difficulty, even when it's really hard, learn how to drink from a cup of gratitude.
Welcome to this special episode. It's also our season finale. I can't believe we're at the end of season 2. And I'm so excited today. We have Lauren and Jonathan Bittner with us to answer your questions for a therapist that we gathered from you earlier. Lauren is a licensed professional counselor. She specializes in the treatment of complex trauma, anxiety, panic, and addiction. She has a private practice with offices located in Skippack and Chestnut Hill. She loves iced coffee, hanging out with her dog, and thrifting. I feel ya. Jonathan is a mental health therapist, a social media influencer, a business owner, and a combat veteran. And he enjoys helping others and spending time with his wife and his dog. And it's the same dog, folks. They're married, if you hadn't gathered from the last name. So I know their dog as well. She's wonderful. I would want to hang out with her all the time as well. Welcome, you two. Thank you so much for being willing to do this so we could get some questions answered right in time for the holidays, which I think is probably going to help some people.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. I'm excited.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited too.
I am as well. And everyone, I'm going to be sharing in the show notes ways that you can contact them if you have further questions or find them for therapy. They're just amazing counselors and just helping so many people. So let's start with a tough one. What do you do if there's a toxic person in your family?
Yeah, it's a very on-point question given the holidays, just because for most people, the holidays are an exciting, cheerful time. Does not mean it's easy for folks or that suddenly family dynamics change. Mm-hmm. And just because we have someone that we're biologically connected to or related to doesn't mean that they are entitled to having access to us or a relationship with us. So if there are toxic people in your family, there's a couple of things you can do. The first of which is really thinking about your interaction with that person, what you feel up to, and establishing some boundaries there. So if you feel like small doses, you can be cordial or kind of detached with love while you have to be together for a larger family gathering, and have some distance or give yourself permission to take breaks or whatever, or leave early or stay at a family gathering for only a certain amount of time, that can be really helpful. Mm-hmm. If the toxicity is beyond that ability to manage, then this is a drastic thing, but it is worthwhile for people to know that you can detach with love. And sometimes that means that it comes at a sacrifice, that you don't get to spend time with all of your family at their gathering. But if there's a toxic family member that you do not want to be around, you are not obligated to be with that person. And so sometimes
it's powerful to know. That's powerful to know. I think there are a lot of people who think it's wrong.
Yeah, it doesn't make you mean.
Yeah, that's awesome. Boundaries are good.
Mm-hmm. And it's tricky when it's family, right? Because I think
right.
all have an expectation that our family would be the ones that get us, love us, respect us the most. And that's not necessarily always the case. And it's not often because our family members are bad or mean. They just might not be in a healthy spot or even be aware of the way that they're impacting us. But it's our responsibility to teach people how to treat us.
Very good advice. Very good advice. We can only take care of ourselves. And sometimes one of those boundaries is maybe a chance to have a healthy break from each other. And as a Christian, I would think you could even be praying for that person and loving them from a distance, but staying healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, the boundaries are very important, but I think self-respect is also important. So you
Yeah.
have to respect yourself enough to say, hey, look, this isn't healthy for me, and to be able to set those boundaries. And I think that self-respect has to come first. Because without that, you kind of go with, the flow of how everything's going.
Yeah. And there's no room for growth or change if you keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah. I think respect is really important. And I think a lot of us, our self talk is kind of negative. And so we have to learn to have positive self talk and positively view ourselves and to take care of our health first and realize that that's okay. I'm so on board with this. I've always wanted to ask that question myself, and those are great answers.
Yeah, it's so true. I think a lot of us, negative self-talk is super common, but honestly, if I could have access to another person's brain or if someone could have access to mine, it's beyond negative self-talk. Many times without actively working on it, we're abusive to ourselves, the way that we
Wow.
devalue ourselves, the way that we talk down to ourselves. And so one of the things that's been really helpful for me and one of the things that I teach my clients, whether it comes to drawing boundaries with toxic family or just overall in the way that we speak to ourselves, is course correcting like a nurturing parent would. So we can
Mm.
still acknowledge our shortcomings when we fail, but instead of shaming, which side note never gets anybody to a great lasting change through shame, that's never the channel, is just accessing, a nurturing parent role to a younger version of yourself of saying, okay, here are some of the needs that you have, or if you've messed up, being able to say, all right, we really dropped the ball on that one, but let's course correct, instead of saying something like, oh my gosh, you're the worst, you do this all the time, you deserve to be treated this way.
That's beautiful. I love thinking about talking to yourself as your inner child and that compassion that you do have on your own children or other people to have that on yourself. That's very helpful information.
Mhm.
Now, another question we had was how can I figure out why I get so angry all the time?
Yeah, it's a tough one because it's really broad. So there's a couple of things that I was kind of thinking. The first of which is understanding the main emotions that I teach people are mad, sad, happy, and afraid. I simplify it because they're kind of the umbrella emotions. Any other emotion is going to fall under one of those main ones: mad, sad, happy, and afraid. So if this person's talking about, I feel angry, I'm mad, understanding that anger is a very protective emotion. It's an emotion where you have much more control. We
Mhm.
take happiness out of the equation because no one has really any issue with happiness. That leaves fear and that leaves sadness, which are both very vulnerable feelings. They're feelings that make us feel powerless and out of control. So the first thing I would say to that listener is trying to maybe dig down a little bit to see if there's any fear or sadness underneath the surface that anger could potentially be protecting, um, to do some reflecting about that. It can be scary sometimes to have anger show up. The other thing is compressed anxiety over the course of time can lead to agitation and anxiety build up to the place of anger. So I'd ask them to kind of reflect in both of those areas. Do you feel like there's any underlying anxiety or fear there or potential sadness? That might be why the anger is showing up and you might find yourself lashing out.
That's really interesting. I wrote down here while you were talking that you said anger may be protecting the
Mm-hmm.
fear or the sadness. That's quite an image that the anger is trying to keep the others from being exposed. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
it's like a bodyguard to fear and to sadness.
Wow. Well, I think that's important for all of us to realize, not just in our own anger, but when someone's angry towards us, that perhaps they're feeling vulnerable.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really agree with what Lauren said, but I just want to add something to that also is oftentimes it's if we have unresolved trauma in our lives, it comes out as anger because
Hmm.
there is that fear that Lauren had talked about, or maybe an individual just doesn't know, um, you know, what emotions or feelings, everything kind of gets jumbled around. But, it's oftentimes a trauma response where,
Yeah.
it could be anger is a way that you saw, one of your parents or both of your parents or whoever raised you treat people when they got frustrated or there was a mistake that was made in the home.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we learn from our surroundings, and so when we're younger, we see somebody yelling or getting angry over little things. They definitely probably had trauma in their life and it just never resolved it. But as an individual growing up in that environment, it's easy to look at that and it's like, okay, well, this is how they demonstrated, how to communicate through
Yeah.
anger. So it's
Yeah.
easy for, that individual to kind of continue that. But I think the underlying issue with that oftentimes is that trauma. And it's the only way that you know how to express what you're feeling.
Yeah.
That's a
And a lot of people don't know what their trauma, like where it came from, unless they do the work, right?
Yes, and I think a lot of people look at trauma as, oh, I saw somebody die, or I was in
Right.
a serious car accident. But I consider those like big T traumas, and I think there's a lot of little T traumas of, whether it's getting laughed at in school or, somebody, a friend turned their back on you.
Hmm.
You can't really fit it into a big T or a little T trauma because what could be little for somebody is something big for somebody else.
Yeah, that's fair and something to really think about. I read a book recently where it was talking about when you were really little, before you could speak in the first couple of years, and before you could really articulate how you were feeling and how dependent upon what was incoming, that you would make judgments about yourself, whether you were good or bad.
Mhm.
And it really struck me as, wow, we carry that, don't we? Unless we figure out that that's there.
Yeah, it's so true. Simplistically, child language, of which we all have an inner child, is am I safe? Am I unsafe? Am I good or am I bad?
Wow. I mean, that's powerful. If we could really boil it down to realize that they were the experiences we were having, and how many of us, I know myself, I had so many experiences where I thought it was bad.
Hmm. And I think there's so much things that happen during our childhood that people don't really reflect on.
Yeah.
Things that happen even before you could speak, even, events that happened to you before you were even able to have a solid memory can really affect you and for the
Yeah.
rest of your life.
Yeah. Oh, that's very sad that that could just stay with you and you could never get past it and believe it as truth. I mean, it's a lie.
Yeah, and there's definitely as long as you can put in the work, I believe you can get through everything. Life may not be what quote unquote people consider normal, but
Hmm.
I believe that there is such a thing as a new normal that's based on each individual.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I don't think we would have both. We've had very different experiences of finding our way to being therapists, but we wouldn't have devoted our life and career to helping people if we didn't think it was possible to, experience joy and happiness and satisfaction and fulfillment again.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, the name of this podcast is A Cup of Gratitude, and kind of the sub thought in it is that we can find gratitude even in the midst of difficulty. And I think having hope, which is what I think going to a therapist and unpacking some of these things can give you, is the kind of the key to being able to see the grateful things.
Totally. It's amazing how quickly, grown adults, you can access core stuff by even reprocessing some of the stuff that was confusing as a child. Like John said, whether it's a large T trauma or a small T trauma is irrelevant. It's still confusing for a young child. So even if maybe to his point, someone, was being laughed at school, if we can even understand as adults that there was probably something going on with that bully or that other child that laughed at you or whatever. It really
Right.
wasn't about you. It
Yeah.
still did have a huge impact on you. So we're not dismissing the feeling, but we're also giving ourselves kind of time developmentally to catch up and understand and process that you were not, in fact, being, ridiculed to the point of never experiencing love and belonging again. Now, when you're a preteen and you're just anxious to fit in, it's devastating because you're saying, I just want to be like everybody else. I
Yeah.
don't want to stand out. I just want to fit in.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, our next question I'm interested in because I hear it said so often. I've also heard the word enmeshed. Can you explain what codependent means and what happens in those types of relationships?
Sure, it's definitely a loaded word. When I think of codependency, I think of someone who did not learn, likely through their family of origin, boundaries. And so it's really hard for them to tell, generally speaking, where they end and another person starts. That being said, there are some people who are very rigid with their boundaries, and that arguably is also unhealthy. But if we talk about codependency, this is someone where um, there's really not a whole lot of boundaries. They're very dependent on another person. The boundaries are loose, and often there's going to be kind of things where the person that's struggling with boundaries is going to feel like their mood is dependent on the other person, or like they have to fix the other person, they have to be responsible for the other person, they have to ignore their own needs. And so often I find that codependency shows up a lot with something called attachment theory, which comes from childhood experience and who our primary nurturer was.
Okay.
And generally speaking, for the simplicity's sake, there's secure attachment, and I always joke in my office, God bless the securely attached. I am not one, and 60% of the population is not. But for that 40%, good for you. That's wonderful. For those that are not securely attached, you're also okay in the world. We figure it out, but there's anxious attachment and there's avoidant attachment. Generally speaking, anxiously attached people fear abandonment, and so they kind of desperately long for connection in a way that can be really, really unhealthy or suffocate sometimes their partner or their loved one, whether it's romantic or not. And then the avoidantly attached are super duper independent to the point of not really wanting to open up and have connection. When I think of codependency, I think of a root of insecure attachment. There's such a significant desire for love and belonging and to feel like you're part of something and you're accepted, that you will stop at no costs in order to make that happen, which sometimes gets us into some sticky situations. You'll go against what you would typically want or your values, or you'll put yourself in some dangerous situations. Often codependent people find narcissistic people. That's usually the dynamic that shows up.
Huh. Why does that happen? I'm sure it's really complicated.
Well, the homeostasis, it's not necessarily healthy, but a codependent person's going to put up with the bullcrap of a narcissist. So that's kind of the way it rolls.
Right. You had mentioned that they want to fix other people, or you talked about fear of abandonment. So if you end up with a narcissist and you're codependent, you're going to be afraid to really challenge all those narcissistic personality. Correct. Right. Okay. That makes sense.
So you're more likely to be okay with a power dynamic where you don't have power and say.
Right. What about you, Jonathan? What do you think about codependent relationships?
I just go along with what Lauren was saying. I think she did a great job explaining it. There's actually nothing else that I would really add with that. But I think, one form of codependency can often happen through what they call trauma bonding, is people who all experience trauma in their life, whether it's separate or together, they're connected to each other. And that's kind of what they bond over, is the traumatic experiences that they've been through. Again, whether it was together or separate, it's a way that they kind of become dependent on something that's not really positive. And I just wanted to add that about codependency.
That makes me want to ask a question. So is that one of the reasons why they tell people who are in recovery not to be with other people in recovery?
And that is a big reason with that. And, and also people in recovery, it's usually a group process if somebody relapses, and that codependency or the trauma bond, it's more likely that everybody else connected to that individual will also relapse.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's just more than just like a surface level, and it's a lot of things that people don't think about.
Yeah. Now, we talked a lot already about drawing boundaries. And the next question is, how do I draw a boundary?
Yeah, so just like I was saying, kind of the discernment of where I end and another person begins, it's symbolically being able to draw that imaginary line, being able to practice being your own individual person apart from another person. Part of drawing boundaries, it really depends on who's around you and how receptive they're going to be. For someone that's really taking baby steps, which is awesome, in learning how to draw boundaries, I really ask them to practice first in the room, in session. If they can't do it in session, they're not going to be able to replicate it out in the real world. So it's kind of like strength training. You're really kind of adding some weight on your building. And then you start by identifying one or two people that are likely to be receptive in your world. We're not going to start with immediately that toxic family member. That's going to be the challenge. We're going to face it, but we're kind of building and taking steps. So one of the things that I tell people is just being able to be really honest about what you need or how you're feeling. We'll even often kind of use humor. So in my group that I run, there's a group that I have for women who historically have struggled with boundaries. They've been like the family hero to fix things and stuff like that. And one of the things that they practice even in the group is internally, even if no one's done anything unkind, they will practice saying, oh man, I actually feel a little bit uncomfortable right now. Or they can crack a joke if it makes it a little bit easier. Like, when you said that, I want to like retreat inside of myself or whatever. They're practicing owning their stuff and not fixing each other. What they all have in common is they will try to mother each other. So we'll kind of practice in the group. Again, if you have too loose of boundaries, that's when codependency is going to show up. There's a little bit of a lack of identity, feeling overly responsible. If it's too rigid, we need to ease up on boundaries because we then avoid intimacy and asking for help, and we can be too detached.
Okay.
A great exercise that I ask any listeners to kind of think about is, I want you to read The Giving Tree. Most people are really familiar with Shel Silverstein and his books. But I want you to flip through. You can probably even find it online if you don't own a copy. Read through the story again through your adult eyes and notice the feelings that come up. Okay. So some people feel angry, and they feel angry that the boy asks the tree for all these things and she keeps giving and giving and giving and giving. Some people feel like, oh my gosh, wow, that tree must have really, really loved the boy. Respectfully, if anger shows up, you probably have healthier boundaries because you're saying, wow, that tree really was disrespected. If your initial response, this is no judgment, it's just the truth. If your initial response was, wow, that tree must have really loved the boy that she was willing to do all that, and you admired the tree, we're probably dealing with some loose boundaries, and it gives you some area to work on. Is that it is not reasonable that the tree gives every single piece of herself for the boy. She really loses herself in the story.
Oh, that is such a wonderful example that anybody can do, and really, really helpful. I appreciate that you shared that. Thank you.
So for me, something I want to add is, even before you think about drawing a boundary or, setting that boundary, it's first realizing what your value is. Because if you don't look at yourself as somebody who has value, then you'll never be somebody who will begin to advocate for themselves, and then which in return you can learn to set boundaries. Because it's self-respect is, going back to that and being to advocate for yourself to say, hey, this is what I need. Because I work with clients who are the first ones to run to anything, whether it's their family needs something or your friends need something. They're the ones that everybody turns to because, number one, it could be they're an amazing person. Number two, it's they always are there to help, but looking at the effects of that. How is that playing an impact on you as a person? Who's meeting your needs? And it's
Yeah,
okay to say no. And I think that's important. Is I think in the society, we always want to be the one to say yes and to be the one to try to fix everything. But I think it's okay to say no, whether it's every once in a while or just starting with one thing, just learn to say
absolutely.
no to one thing.
Yeah.
And then, once you learn to advocate for yourself, things do become easier.
Yeah, absolutely. That's all really good stuff. I love what really stood out to me was value yourself. And it does tie into what you were talking about, self-respect. I think it ties into identity. It ties into those feelings we were talking about that you had, whether you were good or bad when you were nonverbal as a child. I think it just keeps building on itself. I think it's also, does that tie into people that are people pleasers?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
People who try to please people, they could have some, whether they look at themselves personally a certain way, whether they don't feel good about themselves, but how they begin to feel good about themselves is helping everybody, or
Yeah.
that trying to be that person that everybody looks to as,
Hmm.
oh, this person does such a great job. This person is such a big help. And I think the
Yeah.
word no has, like, for a lot of people, purely a negative meaning to it, where
Yeah.
no doesn't necessarily have to be negative. It could be something positive.
That's right. That's right. I was a people pleaser for a lot of my life. I'm reformed and I love the word no. It's so empowering. And yes, you have to use it in proper times. That's what's best for you and in the situation. But if you devalue yourself because you say no to something, yeah, there's a problem there. I remember what it felt like to always have the burden of trying to make sure everybody else was okay, and it kind of became my identity, and that is not who I am. That's not what I need to do to be me. I'm enough. And I think that's what a lot of people don't think they're enough.
I think that's so true. And I think we also live in a society that correlates selfishness with boundary. And that's not the
Yeah.
same thing. It's not, you're not mean or selfish for knowing your boundaries or knowing your limits. Something that I've had to really, work on and learn is that you can have too much even of a good thing, and
Mhm.
having to discern when I need to say no to even something that's positive so that I can rest or whatever I need to do. And
Yeah.
as a recovering perfectionists and people pleasers have lots in common. And it's usually a hustle so that you feel like you're valuable. And what John's talking about is really understanding and doing the work to getting to a place where you know you are valuable regardless of what you can produce or offer to other people.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And it's the way we should all be. It's such a shame that many of us aren't that way right now, that we do need to do work to get to that place. But it's so hope filled that we can.
Yeah, I think it's human nature. There's a great book by Tracy Litt called Worthy Human. And she basically is saying, that value as a human is your birthright. It's outside, and we know that's also biblical. It has nothing to do with our performance or what we can do for other people. It's your birthright as a human that you are inherently valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. What a golden nugget that is.
Mhm.
The next question is one I have myself as well. What is projection? And then the sub question is, why do people do that?
So this is a fun one, and this goes back to our main man, Sigmund Freud. Uh, Freud definitely is taboo for some folks, but he really got some things right. And one of the things is projection, and it's a defense mechanism. It's something that is largely unconscious. For simplicity's sake, I want the listeners to imagine like a big iceberg, and everything above the waterline is your conscious mind, that which you are aware of.
Mhm.
Everything kind of flirting in around just the top of the waterline is your preconscious. It's 1 foot in the unconscious, 1 foot in the conscious. And everything below the waterline, which we know an iceberg has most of its mass underneath the waterline, is your unconscious mind. It's the part of you that you are not aware of. The really cool part is through reflection, through doing therapy, through all kinds of stuff. We can access the unconscious and it can bubble up to the surface to the conscious level through self-awareness. It's really amazing. Projection is a defense mechanism that is often protecting insecurity or an area of woundedness. And so what will happen is that the person will unknowingly kind of put you on the hook for something that likely they are actually doing, or they will cast you in the role of an area of woundedness that they've had in their past. So I've had in the past, symbolically, unconsciously, clients assume that I do not care and I'm not listening to them, and they're putting up a wall because maybe their mom.
Okay.
That was kind of the dynamic that was showing up. And so they'll project and cast me into this role or assume that I'm going to think that they're stupid or whatever. We're just kind of unconsciously playing out old stuff. The reason the brain does this is because it's wanting to have a happier ending, but without bringing it to the conscious level, without awareness, we're unknowingly repeating and causing the same kind of error. The other area that I was saying is that people kind of accuse us of things. So the age-old projection I tell my students all the time is, if you are guilty of cheating and you accuse your partner of cheating, you're guilty of conscience and you're projecting it onto them. And reading into things. That's how I would kind of describe projection showing up. It's our job to notice when that happens and figure out how to bring it into the room without shaming the person and helping them realize, oh, that pattern is showing up again.
Do you think everyone's willing to receive that, though? If you notice that with someone, let's say it's somebody who has been rather toxic to you because of that.
Yeah, it really depends on the person and their willingness to do part of their work. So not every person's going to be receptive. I'm talking about in working with clients, but if we're talking about toxic family members or toxic people in your life, I really don't know how fruitful it's going to be for you to bring it to their attention. It's only going to probably add fuel to the fire. It's not your responsibility to say to the person, oh, you're projecting onto me. Unfortunately, that's likely to only backfire.
So that's a place for somebody, if it's happening to you, to draw a boundary and just to realize that's what's happening and love the person from a distance in that area and not take it personally.
Totally, because it feels like being gaslit, where you're saying, oh my God, this person keeps accusing me of this. Like, am I crazy? If you are asking yourself that question, you need a strong, rigid boundary. Because if you're starting to think to yourself, oh my gosh, is it me? That's being gaslit.
Yeah. I think this happens to a lot of people.
And I don't have anything to add to that. Lauren did an amazing job explaining what that is.
Yeah, it reminded me of when you were talking about anger protecting fear and sadness. It's almost like this projection is protecting their woundedness so that they don't have to look at it. Is that kind of a layman's version of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's accurate. And, I don't, it's case by case, but likely the thing that is in common is that the person that's projecting is protecting something and likely is dealing with an area of insecurity. And that's why it's showing up. And the area of their insecurity is probably what they're projecting onto you.
Yeah. Do those types of people tend to want to be in control a lot? Does that go together?
I would say that there's definitely a correlation there. I don't know. I would love to hear John's opinion on this because I feel like every human wants varying degrees of control.
That's true.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, where I don't think there's a single person who doesn't want any control at all. I think there's people who tell themselves that they don't want to have control. And I think that's where, things can get a little bit messy is when people aren't able to recognize that aspect.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next question, I think these all kind of go together, which is awesome. It says, I feel like my family tried to make me the scapegoat. And how can I get away from that role? I love that they ask that very healthy question. after asking, kind of telling you what they feel their family has done.
Yeah, these questions are really wonderful. It's really hard because I'm thinking about listeners and the holidays and these dynamics at play, and these are the things that many people are experiencing but aren't talking about. So wonderful questions, and I hope that we can give people some guidance. I highly, highly recommend, if you do not have a therapist, to consider the value of doing that, because it can really, all year round they support you, but also heading into the holidays, it's a safe place to kind of practice how you're going to manage, if you're going to see your family at all, dealing with nuances of all these things, because magically the instant that we're all together, we go right back to those old roles, or we feel like we're being smushed back into that box. So for this person that's talking about feeling like they're the family scapegoat, it's a really hard role, because oftentimes the scapegoat is the one who is blamed and feels very much like, the black sheep, the outcast, the problem. My experience is that a lot of times the scapegoat is the one that is willing to acknowledge the elephant in the room, or that something is dysfunctional in the family, and that is a threat to the family. I don't know how many times I've had teenagers who are awesome, by the way. I love my teens. And basically, not all parents, but the majority of parents are saying, fix my kid. And I'm thinking, your kid's doing quite all right. They're having a normal reaction to the dysfunction of what's happening within the family unit. They are not, in fact, the problem. They're the whistleblower.
Yeah.
Which is, it's a heavy mantle to carry sometimes, because the scapegoat feels like they're constantly going against the grain of the family unit. This goes back to that inner child that I was talking about, and this doesn't instantly fix anything, but I want you to really consider, if you are going to spend time with family and you feel like you're kind of being pressed back into that role, the hope is that over time, some family members might be able to be receptive to you talking about not wanting to be in that role. But until that time comes, or if that time does not come, I want you to really visualize a younger version of yourself, a childlike version of yourself. And when you're with the family unit, that you are visualizing that you will never turn your back on your younger self, that you're being with the decision to either feel abandoned by your family or abandoned by yourself. And I want you to never abandon yourself, even if that means drawing a boundary line or having to really deal with the grief of the family still putting you in that old role. That you won't just go along with it for the sake of not being abandoned by the family, because inner child saying, ouch, this hurts, I don't like this, that you're teaching yourself you'll always show up for that younger version of yourself, and you're never going to bail.
I just think that was just so impactful and necessary to say, and I'm really grateful for that advice. I feel like in sharing that, literally, you can never be alone. You always have yourself to be there for yourself. And honestly, when the family is doing that, it's an unhealthy scenario. And so you're showing up for yourself. Yeah.
Maggie, I think it's Maggie Scarf, in her book Hold Me Tight, talks about child development and how that shows up later on in our friendships and our romantic relationships. And she talks about it. Every child gets the opportunity when they're young. No one has a sit down conversation, but it's an unspoken, clearly communicated conversation where you have one of two choices. You can be honest about how you feel, what you need, and what you're noticing in the family, and risk abandonment and rejection. Or you can shut the heck up about it, swallow your feelings, ignore what you need, and be more likely to be accepted and feel like you belong with the family. A lot of us have to find our way back to realizing how we did abandon that younger version of ourselves. And we all do it because we want to feel like we're part of and we fit in. But it's not healthy to ignore, like if you're in a family dynamic and you're sitting around the Thanksgiving table or you're gathering for the holidays and that family member keeps making jabs about how you're a screw up, that really, really hurts. You don't need to hear over and over again how they think you're the screw up. You really have to figure out how to protect that kiddo inside of you.
Yeah, that's right. And I've noticed that some of the people that tend to do these things like to do it in private.
Hmm.
So what do you do when it's an in private thing and you don't have anyone else there? Maybe they're sharing things about you with the rest of the family, and then head on when they talk to you, they're having this dynamic with you and you don't feel like you can win or do anything right. What do you do then?
Yeah, I'll ask John too, but I would say that would be an indication of a boundary that I'm not going to engage with you. You no
Yeah,
longer have access to me, even if that means that, you think that I'm mean or cold or whatever, then that might be an indicator for a more strict boundary. I'm not going to play mind games. It's too
yeah,
exhausting.
yeah. Good advice.
Yeah, and I like to add that it's the boundaries is important, but I look at, I think this is a great question, but in order, how can I get away from that role? And I think it's a thought process. Like, I don't think,
Yeah,
it goes from all of a sudden you're in that role. I think there's loose boundaries that unfortunately have happened where, if you haven't advocated for yourself and haven't stood up for yourself, it's easier to fall into that role as a scapegoat. And, I don't,
yeah,
like I said, like, I don't think it's automatically it happens. I think, realistically, it was a longer process. And then once we're able to recognize the steps that have happened, and then we can start to address that. But I think boundaries are important to put in place so it doesn't happen.
yeah. When you put a boundary in place and you're learning how to stand up for yourself, what are some things you would suggest people do? Obviously, therapy is one of them. Are there other things that we can do as we look for a therapist or find the right therapist that we can do to help establish a building up of self after we've put down the boundary?
I think one of the most important things is number one, therapy. Always go to therapy, and it's important. But
Yeah.
number two is surround yourself with people who you trust and people who respect you. And I
Mhm.
think it's important to have somebody like that or a group of friends who can speak positive things into your life, who can call you out on things,
Yeah.
or can help, build you up to the place where you are able to put those boundaries in place.
I think that's an awesome answer. I think we all need community for that reason. And a lot of times we find ourselves in these strange relationships and these difficult family dynamics, as well as probably with husbands and wives, and every kind of relationship you can have. To have that community where you can kind of have a sounding board of, am I really that way? Is everybody seeing me like that? Do I need to work on something, or should I draw a boundary? Yeah, I'm okay and I value who I am. So I think that community piece is really important. Thanks for adding that.
You're welcome.
The next question is for you as you work in therapy. How do you separate everything you process with clients from your own personal life? That is a good question.
Yeah, I love this question. I think you'll get very different answers from Jonathan and myself. Um, I would say that it is more of a challenge for me to separate, and I certainly practice it, but I seem to be more impacted. And so, I would say when things are kind of hard to process with clients, or, it really is an honor. People are allowing you to sit with some of the most painful, secretive parts of themselves.
Mhm.
For me, I think as a deeply empathetic person, it's my superpower, but it's a double-edged sword. And so I have to just be very mindful that I am still impacted by, it is an energy exchange. I'm sitting with that person, giving them everything I've got. So usually I need to kind of have a little bit of time and space. So the first thing is bare minimum in private practice. I have at least a half hour in between sessions. Um, During that time, I will take a break, take some, time off of screen time, allow myself to just kind of sit, process, think, hang out with Annie because she's in the office with me. Logistically speaking, that helps from session to session. Doing my own self-care, my own therapist really helps me process a lot of stuff or anything that seems to kind of be lingering. For me, it feels impossible not to be impacted by the people that I'm helping because I'm sitting with them in their pain. But I'm giving myself permission to discharge the stuff that I need to, whether that be verbally processing, whether that means I need to sometimes even do some things that are more based in my nervous system and getting rid of some of the stuff that wants to stick around my body. And the last thing is really boundaries. So reminding myself that I am not their personal savior. Jesus does a great job of that himself. He does not need me to save anybody or rescue anybody. What my responsibility is. The thing that has really helped me is the visualization of helping someone along in their journey, but not necessarily knowing what stage I'm helping them in. I could be tilling the soil, I could be planting the seed, I could be watering the seed, I could see the fruit. It really depends. It is not my responsibility. It's their responsibility. The other thing is the boundaries of clients and access to me, right? So my clients are able to reach out to me should they need anything in between session. I'm fine with that. They do a wonderful job of respecting the boundary. But if they were emailing me at 3 a.m, texting me at 3 a.m, what they had for dinner, we're going to have a conversation. And it's never been historically a problem, but that's also part of it, is figuring out, how to create some separation from the work that I do.
Yeah, I did want to just say, for those who don't know, Annie is actually your therapy dog that's with you in the office all the time. We hadn't mentioned her name before, and I just want to make sure they understood you didn't have another person with you in the office all the time. And also that having a therapy dog there, I mean, wow, we all know how animals just calm us down, soothe us. They're just 100% pure love. So what a great resource to have there. And the other thing is that I love how, when you talk about your boundaries as therapists, that the core things you're talking about are really healthy, but they're also biblical, and being aware. And I think that's great, knowing that you're not the savior of the world, and that your job. I loved how you talked about, whether you're planting the seed or whether you're tilling the soil or whether you're looking at helping harvest the fruit. In each situation, it's going to be different, and you don't really even need to know what you're doing. You're just doing your part. Yeah, that's great.
And I think for me, it's definitely I'm definitely different from Lauren in this aspect. For me, it's like, every therapist has their own problems, including me.
Right.
So my problems, not to sound selfish, are more important at the, during our sessions. My clients are number one, but after the sessions, I have to be number one in my life when it comes to mental health. And like, I've come to the conclusion, it's like I can't rent out the space to them for free in my head, things that have worked out. So for me, it's the boundaries are important, where I don't give my personal phone number to clients.
Right.
Because honestly, I don't want them to contact me in between sessions, on a personal, because a cell phone is very personal unless it's a work number. So they have my email address, my work email address, and a work phone number. And I think having that separation for me personally, it's different for each therapist, but for me personally, I think that's important. And like I was talking about earlier, it's important for me to focus on my own mental health and not my client's mental health outside of a session.
Absolutely. I mean, it reminds me of the old story about, people are in the airplane, it's starting to go down, the masks drop for oxygen. As a parent, as a therapist, you're the person in the caretaker role, you need to make sure you have the oxygen first, so you can't help anyone. So I think it's really wonderful that you guys are being really mindful about being in the best health you can be, so that you can be there for your clients. And the amount of things that you take on, I don't think any of us can imagine. You're a story keeper and a secret keeper, and someone that people go to for a resource of hope and healing. And I believe one of the things that's really important, and I don't know I think both of you do this, is going to a therapist yourself to help you make sure you can keep yourself in the best of shape.
For sure. I mean, I think it's what ethically we're supposed to do. It is life-changing to be in therapy, and I feel like if I didn't do that, it would be hypocritical.
Yeah. Yeah. The next question is also probably really interesting for me because I've wondered it myself. Do you find it hard to kind of turn off your therapist brain when you're in social situations? Are you able to relax? Or are you constantly maybe analyzing what's going on in conversations or people's lives? Is that difficult to traverse the two for you?
I think, again, we're going to see a varying response here. And this is the cool part of all therapists are different.
Yeah.
All backgrounds are different, and also being married, to therapists, it's just an interesting dynamic, but we are very different. I would
Yeah.
say that I do not turn that off, that it feels rather involuntary. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm critical or necessarily analyzing. I just think that I've kind of permanently had kind of a vision correction of being curious as to why people do the things that they do. Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes I can be crabby or I'm emotionally impacted, but generally speaking, I feel like I'm always curious of why someone is doing what they're doing or not doing what they're doing. I feel like that clinical training and experience just working with humans, I don't necessarily feel like I shift gears at all. I might just have to remind myself with boundaries that it's not my job to necessarily do anything about it. It's not my job necessarily to ask any follow-up questions, but I feel like I am more observant than the average person. I also, for listeners that are interested, you can do a Myers-Briggs. It's like an abbreviated personality test. The Myers-Briggs itself is really long, but it's called 16personalities.com. If you want to learn about yourself, most people find it fascinating, but it breaks down different categories. And perception is part of mine, but they break down kind of your percentage out of 100 of thinking versus feeling. And I am 97% feeling. So I can't just simply turn that off. I think it's my gift to people and being with them. And is a double-edged sword, but I can't shift gears once I'm not in the office anymore and change that I am deeply impacted by the world around me, for better or for worse, and deeply impacted by the pain and suffering of other people.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you. That's a very vulnerable answer, but really helpful. And I think seeing kind of your character and your personality as somebody who is maybe considering going to therapy, it's awesome to hear that someone is so compassionate and so deeply feeling and is doing this to give back to the world and giving pretty much their all to do it.
Thank you.
And like Lauren said, we definitely have different answers for this one. For me, I have no problem shutting my brain off as soon as I leave the office. It's it's a valuable thing to spend time with people who are hurting and the time of need during those hours that I'm with clients. But it's also tiring.
Yeah.
And I think I make the choice to say, look, when I'm out of the office, I'm going to focus on myself, my family, my friends, things that are self-care. Because again, going back to a comment that you had made a couple minutes ago was, it's like being on an airplane. If we don't take care of ourselves and, with the masks that come down, we're not going to be able to help the person next to us. And if I'm constantly spending time thinking about everybody else in my community that I see, it's tiring. I'm not going to be able to help the people who are my clients. But not to say that there aren't times where it's like I see somebody struggling and thinking, okay, well, what are they going through? Or, somebody has an angry outburst and it's like, oh, well, I wonder what's going behind that. Like, I'm not some cold-hearted person, but I think there needs to be a healthy boundary that you set of when it's okay to turn off that mindset and when you have to turn that back on.
Yeah. Now, this wasn't a question from the listeners, but it makes me think that it should be asked. What about your personal relationship? Do you turn it on or off when you're dealing with each other?
That's a great question. I feel like in this case for me, I cannot use my therapist brain because I'm so emotionally connected to Jonathan. I can't,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a good thing. You know, what husband and wife need to analyze each other. That's for our therapists to do. But
Yeah.
I don't feel like I think like a therapist when we are connecting or arguing or whatever.
Hmm.
And even though we're both therapists, yes, we do argue from time to time, people. It's a normal part of a relationship. But yeah, I feel like it's too emotional for me to
Mm.
at all have that role.
Interesting.
I was just going to say that, like, I don't look at her through an eyes of a therapist.
Yeah.
It's not my job, to be honest with you. And I'm not her therapist. I'm not
Right.
somebody who's going to help her get to the root of what's going on. And and it's good that she does have somebody that she
Yeah.
can talk to.
That
Yeah.
being said, I wanted to add, relationships hurt and they heal. One thing that I feel really thankful for is because we both, have clinical training, I do feel like even though we don't treat each other or see each other through the lens of a therapist, I can only speak on my end. Jonathan has really helped me work through a lot of things that are activating because of my childhood that have nothing to do with him but still impact him. And
Hmm.
his ability to understand that my reaction is more connected to old stuff, doesn't have a whole lot to do with him, has afforded him the opportunity sometimes to love me well through those little things that still show up to teach me that it's
Yeah.
different. And that has been a blessing in my life.
Yeah. That's beautiful. That's awesome. The next question is, what are some tips to stay on top of your mental health during the winter months? And I know a lot of people really experience down, depressing
Yeah.
emotions during the wintertime. I'm one of them. I have to get either out in the sun or listen to music or do
Mm.
some exercise, or I feel it. I used to have one of those lights that you plug in the morning to feel like you had the sun on your face because it really got that bad. So what are some things people can do?
Yeah, this time of year really is brutal. It's dark, it's cold really early. We're spending more time inside. COVID certainly hasn't helped with that. But
Yeah.
couple things. Be mindful of the media that you are consuming. So as we're scrolling through,
Mhm.
um, maybe consider doing a purge. Like if there's an account that when you're following that you feel crappy about yourself because it seems like they have it all together, or it seems like they're always happy and cheery, that might accidentally make you think, oh man, there must be something wrong with me. So maybe doing a little bit of a cleanse of who you're following and the content there, as far as media goes. You talked about the light, a seasonal affective disorder light. It's called a SAD light. Highly
Mhm.
recommend. You can get one for 20 to 30 bucks off of Amazon. It basically mimics having been in the sun. You can sit in front of it for maybe 15 minutes a day. I have one at my office, and it's too bright for me to do work while I'm in front of the light. So one of the things that I'll do is put on a couple songs that I like, and for the duration of the songs, I'll sit with my eyes closed in front of the light. And
Mhm.
there's research, empirical, scientific research that shows that that helps. None of these things are going to totally eliminate, but we're just looking for any reduction of symptoms.
Yeah.
Um, Magnesium has been shown to reduce levels of anxiety and depression. If we're taking it on a daily basis, you can do that in a supplement, like a pill form. There's a brand out there called Calm that does either gummies, or it's like a tea that you make, and it's just magnesium in there, which helps our muscles be a little bit less tense, and that seems to help people a little bit. Connection with others is going to be probably the most important thing, not pretending that you feel happy. If you don't feel happy, having some people that you can be real with, connect to,
Mhm.
tapping into any kind of flow or creativity. What do you enjoy? What makes you excited? What are you passionate about? And spending some time doing something creative. The other thing is anything that is bilaterally stimulating to the brain that sounds a lot more clinical and complicated than it actually is. The basic premise is you have two hemispheres to your brain, your right and your left. The right part of your body, the side of your body, is controlled by the left hemisphere and vice versa. So even if you sit with your legs out in front of you and you crisscross your arms and you're just kind of tapping on your thighs at a pretty moderate pace, that's still technically bilaterally stimulating the brain. That is soothing to the brain. I would suggest listening to some music, doing a couple sets of that bilateral stimulation. Also, if you go on YouTube, there's bilaterally stimulating music where if you put headphones on, it's just rotating sound back and forth between your right ear and your left ear. That generally has a more calming effect for people.
Wow, you gave us a plethora of things. That's wonderful. I think I'm going to take a note of a couple of those additional things that I don't do, because I do notice that I have trouble in the wintertime. That's great.
Yeah, I'm really big into the practical. I want people to feel like, they have skill set and, visualize it as a toolbox. Figure
Yeah.
out what works for you, keep what works, ditch the rest. It's going to be personalized to you. Not every person that journals feels better, but that works for many people. But try some of those things. I would say give them a good 2 weeks of consistently trying it before you decide whether or not you're going to keep it in the toolbox or not.
Awesome. That's great advice.
Yeah, for me, I look at things a little bit different. It's great what Lauren had talked about, and there's definitely a natural component to this. With the seasons changing, the depression that comes along with that, and mental health issues. But one of the biggest things is, again, it's getting dark earlier. We tend to find ourselves staying inside more just because it's colder and it's dark. Nobody really wants to be outside. But one of the easier, simpler things to do is to try to continue living your life the same way you did in the spring, the summer. Go outside when you can, continue to see your friends, go somewhere, get out of the house, because a lot of times it's, because it is getting dark and it's cold, people go home, they sit in front of the computer, or they sit in front of
Right.
their phones looking at Instagram or TikTok, and just put that aside, just go out, maybe find a new hobby, maybe try snowboarding, or especially this time of year with all the Christmas lights out, just drive around and look at
Yeah.
the beauty that nature provides. So I think
Yeah.
that's something that anybody can really get up and do.
Yeah. Another great set, another great list of things to try. And honestly, I think another one that I would add in is exercise really helps me. I don't want to start it, but
Yeah,
after I do it, I feel so much better.
that's definitely a good point, and it helps with anxiety too. And it's worth me mentioning, should you try these things and it still feels like your depression isn't lifting,
hmm
not able to find enjoyment, you are not bad, you're not broken, but you might want to consider talking to a psychiatrist or your primary care about a low-level antidepressant. If
Yeah.
your body needs a little bit of help, store-bought is fine, right? So we don't ever give anybody a hard time if their pancreas has
Yeah.
low levels of insulin. We never, oh man, you have to have store-bought insulin. We never judge them. Same
hmm
concept. If you're trying these things and you're not seeing the lift that you need, you do not have to unnecessarily suffer. Talk to your doctor about the potential of the benefit of an antidepressant.
Yeah. That's wonderful advice. Thank you for adding that. I think too many people are judged. I don't even understand how mental health is not seen as health. I don't understand our world. I don't understand why everybody has to have an opinion, and then it makes you think differently about what your choices are. So it's very important that you shared that. Thank you. Now, I love this question. What's your favorite part of the job?
That was really hard for me because I really love my job. It's a hard one, but it is such a privilege. I think for me, the best part is the level of trust that my clients extend to me in given me access to parts of them that nobody else knows and getting to see the growth because of that. The honor of sitting with people in maybe pain or suffering and them not feeling alone anymore, kind of being in that secret space, getting to get really acquainted with their inner child is probably my favorite part.
Awesome. How about you, John?
So my favorite part of the job is those moments that we have where, our clients kind of understand something new, whether it's understanding that what's happened to them isn't their fault, or, oh, here's something that I can use to help in my personal life. It's just those moments where it's almost like the light bulb goes off, and that's really special to share with clients. Or, I really also love when, things are moving in a positive direction for them, and they come in and say, hey, I did this for the first time, and this is what happened. And it's really makes it worth it for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. That sounds like it would be something that I would look forward to if I was doing what you were doing, especially when there's so much hard work, to see those positive trends is that revelation, somebody really getting it and their life turning must be so rewarding.
Yes.
The next question, I think a lot of people would want to know the answer to. Why do I have trouble managing my money? And then they go on to say that their parents did as well.
Yeah, I thought this was a really relevant question. I certainly am flying blind in that I don't have lots of information here, but I do have some thoughts. I think if I got the chance to talk with this person, I'd ask some follow-up questions to figure out in what way do you feel like there's difficulty managing the money, that kind of thing. But it's really common that our relationship with money and that our beliefs about money are going to be shaped by what was modeled for us growing up. So whether or not we had modeled for us that there's a scarcity and there's not enough money to go around, or we're going to run out, or it was modeled that what money we do have coming in, maybe there wasn't a budget and we're just kind of living for the now, and then kind of get stressed and enjoy nice stuff but not be able to cover our bills. Or maybe everything was taken care of and we had no responsibility or weren't taught anything and bills were covered, but we never really learned how to manage it because our parents always covered it. So many different dynamics at play, but really looking at your own family unit and looking at what was modeled for me, having to reflect on how would I describe my relationship with money, my thoughts, my beliefs, my feelings about money. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients, if money is part of what they want to talk about, their relationship to money, they have kind of this attitude in checking their bank account where if they don't look at it, it doesn't exist. They just ignore it. And then if they have to pull it up, they're kind of wincing. And I'm like, it shouldn't be a mystery to you how much is in there.
That's
so
right.
we have to kind of look at, it's not magic that if you don't look at it, it's growing. Or so we have to kind of face the music and look at where our money's going. And a lot of times a therapist can be really helpful with that and helping you figure out what are those patterns, what changes do I want to see, what are some small steps to me kind of getting ultimately to where I want to be in my relationship with money. Those would be some of the things that I would be taking a look at.
Yeah, very good advice.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good question. And oftentimes we think of, learning as sitting in a schoolroom and the teacher's teaching everything, how to do point A, point B, C, and then we end up with D.
Right.
And, it's not reality oftentimes how it works. So like going back to the modeling, it's, our parents didn't sit there and teach us oftentimes about, oh, well, we're not managing money and this is how it happens. We often learn by how they interact with things, how they respond to the environment, whether they're out spending a lot of money or, holding on to that money like the world's ending tomorrow. It's like they're not necessarily sitting there teaching us this or explaining the thought process, but we learn by their behaviors from watching that. And then we kind of continue on that behavior ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Honestly, I wish more schools would teach on the principles of managing your money and doing a checkbook and keeping it balanced. When I was young, I had parents who took care of everything and they never really taught me how to do anything. So I didn't have credit cards. I didn't know how to balance my checkbook. I didn't really know even how to write out a check. And I
Right.
learned the things on my own, some of which I learned by failing, other things I learned by succeeding. But what I tried to do was not have that be generational. And then when my kids were going to go off on their own, make sure that they knew how to take care of a checkbook, make sure they knew they could come to me and ask questions so that they could figure it out on their own because it was going to be their finances. So I think it was good that they had the follow-up point that their parents had trouble. I think if we learn how to do well with it, then we need to make sure that we pass that on.
Yeah, I think that listener had some good insight already in offering that they noticed that their parents did. They were already
Yeah.
reflecting maybe that's connected.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
But it
folks
would be helpful
that-
if schools would please answer this like gaping hole. There, we have home economics and we learn how to cook things and we learn how to build things with wood. But how about if we learn how to do a load of laundry, balance our checkbook, change the oil in our car, like do all the things you need? Because unfortunately, not every family prepares their children.
Mm-hmm. And it's not often done because they aren't a loving family. They
Yeah.
assume that you know how to do something. And I've had a very well respected, very intelligent client have a very early memory of not knowing how to do something. And they had internalized from that moment, man, I'm such an idiot.
Wow.
And because, the parent wasn't thinking, oh, this 4-year-old doesn't know how to do this task.
Yeah.
And that messaging we carry really deeply inside of us.
Yeah, and you're bringing back a memory for me of teaching my daughter how to tie her shoelaces and her being able to tie everybody else's shoelaces. It also gives you the sense of empowerment, to be a helper and to know I know how to do something.
Right.
I just want to add something real quick. What Lauren was talking about, but sometimes even the parents don't even know because they're
Yep.
dealing with their parents modeled for
It's a
them.
good point. Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
a cycle, and it's easy to say, oh well, my parents should have taught me that. But oftentimes, as you would know as a mom, it's like if you're not taught by your parents, you wouldn't even know to teach your own
It's a good
kids
point.
that.
Yeah.
It's a really good point. And that's what I was saying. I wish there was some dependable place like in school or something where we knew that everyone could have access to how to manage their money well so that they could have a good start in life.
Mm-hmm.
What I was going to share is, and for those of you who listen to the podcast, you've already listened to an individual episode with Lauren and an individual episode with Jonathan. But just in case you didn't know, Lauren is my daughter and Jonathan is my son-in-law. And so how fortunate am I to have all this wisdom and compassion right in the family.
All the therapy.
All the therapy. I'll take it all. But it's been very helpful that you guys do know some things and have some tools that you've been able to share when I ask. And it's just wonderful to know that I'm dealing with someone who's really evolved in that area. And it's lovely to know as a mom that my daughter is being cared for by somebody else, in the same field, that you each are loving each other well, not only biblically, but mental health wise. And
Totally.
that's, yeah, it's healthy and it's good. And I've seen so many unhealthy marriages. It's so nice to know you started off that way.
Yeah.
Now, this question, it's one of the last ones, is a good one. Is it hard to counsel others if you're going through your own stuff? And how do you do it?
Yeah, I think it can be a major challenge. It depends. John was saying how in that moment, we do compartmentalize. It's part of our training and practice that we are all in the room with our client, right? So if our mind drifts, which human nature is that your mind will drift, we bring it back to the focal point of the client, what we're working on, all that kind of stuff. Sometimes when stuff happens in our own personal world, it can get in the way of being able to sit with our clients. And in those rare times, again, we might vary in our responses. I am much more transparent with my clients, and will discern whether or not I feel like I'm in the right headspace to be with them and help them. And if I feel like I'm not, then I'll be honest with them and we'll reschedule. Again, that's a rarity. It does not happen often. As most likely your listeners know, you lost your stepson. I lost my brother a few months back, and that was a huge monkey wrench. I'm still processing, but I'm in a much better ability to compartmentalize now. And so when that first happened, I couldn't meet with clients. I'm in the middle of shock and grief and all kinds of stuff. And so I had to take a step back. And my clients were amazing and understood. And, we're always ethically making sure it's about the client. So I'm not taking the time to tell them how I feel and what I need, but I am going to be honest in saying that I'm going to have a hard time focusing and I need to reschedule. So that'd be the most extreme kind of circumstances. But when generally just normal life is happening, you just get into a certain zone where you're able to put your stuff aside for that time to spend with that client. And I'm not thinking at all about myself and what I need and what I'm feeling while my client's working through their stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's also just so wonderful that you knew that you needed to step away and that is ethically what you did. Um, I I can't even imagine what it was like trying to get to the place where you could see clients again, because I know that it was such a devastating loss for us both.
Mm-hmm. John really helped and was really supportive and saying, if you need to take the time, take the time.
Yeah, that's good advice.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question because that's something people always think about is, oh, well, as a client, if I'm having these issues, then my therapist is probably having issues too.
Yeah.
For me, it's like, like I had talked about earlier, it's unfortunate that it's like I kind of have this switch that I can switch on. And, during that hour or hour and a half with the client, I'm able to recognize that this hour or hour and a half, however long the session is all about them.
Yeah.
And they're the most important person in that room during that time for me. So thankfully, it's like if I'm able to kind of think in my head, okay, well, if I can put away my problems for an hour or however long the session is, then I can be there for that individual.
Yeah.
And I think it's important too if you're just not feeling well or whatever, if it's something very devastating, to talk to your clients to say, hey, I'm not going to be in because I can't give you that hour. So I think it's important to have that honesty with them to say, hey, I'm human too, I'm going through something, I'm not able to be there for you.
Absolutely. I would think that would give them such encouragement that you're the right person for
I think
them.
it's a good point, John, that we're modeling for people that we don't have it all figured out, that life happens to us, that we're also human.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the most minuscule of ways, I kind of understand in that when I do an episode, I pour so much time into having a pre-recording call, getting to know the person, spending time creating questions, and then in the actual recording, I am so leaning in. I can't even do video. I have to do audio because I get distracted and I know myself. So I'm so leaning in and so listening during each stage of the process to that other person. And I'm putting them first. I don't really think about myself. Anything that I add in is something I kind of drop in conversationally, or something that they say comes up as a memory, but I'm focused on them. And so, like I said, it's just in the most minuscule of ways, but I can understand when I get off and I'm done, I don't sit and think about all of the things we talked about. We've had our time together, and I've done my part, which is to listen and share their story. So in a way, I kind of get an element of what you guys are able to do as far as closing the door and moving on. But I do appreciate that it's on such a deep level that I don't know that I could ever do it. honestly.
You have to, I appreciate that, and you have to be able to close the door and move on to the next, because you're kind of like, to your point, doing that 5 to 7 times a day.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're really grateful for therapists and for all that you do. I have a question for each of you, and it's kind of along the lines of my question I always end my podcast with, because I love to know maybe what we would have done had we had a chance to redo something. And I always ask in regular episodes, what would you have said to your younger self if you had any advice to give yourself? What I'd like to ask you guys is, what is one thing that you wish you could have asked a therapist? And I originally had written about when you were younger, but it doesn't have to be when you're younger. Just as, what is one thing that you wish that you could have asked a therapist maybe when you didn't have one available?
So I thought long and hard about this, and for most of your regular listeners, they kind of know our family dynamic, but for people that are tuning in that are new, um, my parents divorced when I was young, both remarried, had a bunch of kiddos, pretty chaotic environments in both families. Wonderful parents, they did the best they could, but it wasn't super healthy. So the question that I would have had was, I really struggled for a while that season we stayed, and my stepdad was still in the home, and his drinking had really escalated. The mood disorder was all over the place. There were like features of psychosis. It was really scary, really abusive. It was really hard. And mom and I, we've talked about this before, but it was a hard position to not, I wanted him out. And so my question would have been for a therapist, how do I manage being in a home where I needed a drastic change, but I wasn't the one in the position to ask him to leave. I was powerless to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an amazing question. And I wish you would have been able to ask someone that. It was really a strange time in that I wanted him to leave too. And I was struggling with what I thought I was hearing from God and what I thought was right, and my own traumas and dysfunctions that I brought along with me. Um, and so for you to have been able to talk with someone about that would have been amazing. And I'm sorry that you didn't have that chance. I'm so glad we're at the place we're at now. Um, I'm glad that that is the question you would have asked, though.
Yeah, and I think it shows a lot of the work that we've done, that I can ask that and you're not defensive, I'm not attacking, you're saying I had my own stuff
Yeah.
going on as to why he hung around longer than probably he should have. And yeah, I think it was confusing for all of us, really painful for all of us. But I think that would have been my question, is when I was, I guess, set on the decision, but couldn't do anything about employing that decision.
Yeah. How about you, Jonathan?
So that's a really hard question for me to answer. I've spent the last 14 years in therapy myself, and through various inpatient programs, as I'm sure some of the listeners are familiar with. Um, so it just, for me, it's like just thinking of this question. Maybe I would, I think it adds something different now that I am a therapist, and I kind of do see some patterns in my family of, like, maybe if I could go back
Mm-hmm.
and be through my teenage years, or even young adults, like through the military and through my own treatment, I would ask, um, maybe more about anxiety, because as I can see, like in my own family, it's,
Yeah.
anxiety is a huge issue in my family. And unfortunately, a lot of my family members don't recognize that that's what they struggle with. And
Yeah.
just what comes out of, can't engage in conversations about different topics without shutting down because the anxiety that they have. So that's something I would probably have wanted to look into, if I
Mm-hmm.
would have been aware of it back then.
Yeah. It's very interesting answers, and I'm so thankful that you're both vulnerable enough to answer that question. As I think for people listening, it's important to know, and you've shared it in so many of your answers, that you're people like everyone else. You've just been trained to help others work through what they're going through, but you're going through things just like everyone else. And I think it's important that we understand that therapists are people too. I think a lot of different areas of employment, certain jobs, people are put on pedestals. And I think therapy is one of them, where you're perfect and I either have to follow or not follow you completely.
Yeah, far from it. It's more like we've been on a really hard hiking trail and we know the way, but we still have our own hiking trail ahead of us. So we're just helping other people along the way.
I like that. I like that image. That's beautiful. Well, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time to answer these questions for our listeners. I'm really excited that we're able to end season 2 this way. And I am going to be putting in the show notes ways for you to see where Jonathan and Lauren are offering their services. They are amazing therapists. Jonathan's practice has a number of other therapists there as well. And if you think after listening to this show, there are any areas where you're struggling and you need therapy, please do something about it. One of the number one things that I hear from people that I interview is that they were alone with their feelings and how horrible that was. And that when they finally shared with somebody, opened up to somebody, they began to get freedom and health and healing. So, thank you again, both of you. I really appreciate your taking the time. It was a wonderful conversation. I think everybody learned something, self-included.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, I hope you have a wonderful day.
You too.
You too.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, so I just want to thank you so much for spending your time with me. And I want to challenge you to go out today and to just take notice and to stop and really look around and find at least one good thing, one thing to be thankful for. If you do that today, you're going to find so many more things tomorrow without even trying. Because once you start, you begin to see what's always been there. And if you need a refill, you can come join me again for another cup. Make sure to subscribe and have an awesome day and go be grateful.